One way of understanding what I'm saying, or what I'm trying to say, is to recognize that there is a historical spectrum where at one end, religious influence, beliefs, institutions, personnel, etc., filled up the very texture of life. While at the other end of the spectrum, as in some Western European societies today, it fills up the interstices of life, birth, marriage, death, and so on. Today's India is somewhere in between, not at the same point on the spectrum as in an ancient or pre-modern past, somewhere here, even as there will be a dispute about how far it has traveled away from that earlier point, but recognize that it has traveled away from that earlier point. Nor can it be claimed that there will be further movement in the future, even if further secularization is both possible and desirable. Many, of course, feel that's not the case. To say this is not to claim that an atheistic utopia is either feasible or desirable, but only to insist that the terms of coexistence between the secular and the religious must be renegotiated. Not that one or the other be eliminated, but the terms of this coexistence will have to be different from that of the past, and one in which the religious cedes ground to the secular. The more complex life of modernity must be lived more complexly, and its balancing mechanisms and norms cannot be those of the past, based as they were on kinship, ritual patterns, religious and customary laws, and the structures befitting highly segmented societies. Modern jurisprudence, for example, has to be secular or more secular in character, whatever the disputes about how secular it is, whether it should go forward or not, but it is fundamentally different from that of the past. The more dynamic society of today gives rise to a more dynamized and self-reflexive self. Religious identity, as pointed out, can remain a fundamental attachment, but much less so than in the past can it be the regular or constant prism through which life is viewed. If one myth is that Indian society has been characterized by an unchanging and continuous permeation by the religious, the second myth is that there is no connection between religion and communalism, beyond the superficial fact that the religious identity is merely a convenient boundary marker for political mobilization by communal forces whose purposes are wholly secular, namely capture and control of the state. To put this view another way, religion is the alphabet from which the ugly words and sentences of communalism are constructed. So why blame the alphabet or language? However, modern democratic life, with its multiple authority systems and differentiated forms and levels of public life, necessarily has different alphabets, languages operating in different domains, and that at the space of public political discourse has a basically secular language. Think of your universities, your hospitals, this, that, etc. Do you want them to be based on a principle of religious patrimonialism, or do you want them to be quite fundamentally different in that respect? The intrusion of a religious language is not in itself communal, but does enhance the likelihood of communal constructions. Even between that and communal constructions, there are various mediations. In the national movement, the intrusion of the discourse of Hindu nationalism, of which there were softer and harder variants, did do damage and contributed in some degree to the tragedy of partition. Moreover, in the post-independence period, the Indian state's declaration of a commitment to showing equal respect to all religions has covered up, if not legitimized, a practice of actively balancing between different communalisms through their representative leaderships. Yes, we need all the resources we can gather, and yes, this does mean fighting on the terrain of the religious against communalism, but do not mistake what is at best a tactical resource for a strategic line of march in the hugely difficult and longer-term struggle to slay the communal beast through a deepening of secularization. Using the religious terrain can do three good things. One, inter-religious crisis management, for example, during periods of communal violence. Two, encouraging inter-religious and religious secular dialogue to promote greater respect and understanding. But neither of these two is the same as institutionally inoculating Indian society against the communal disease. And third, religious systems in Indian civil society also address the secular needs of health, education, recreation, culture, economic, financial help, family support, etc. And by doing so, win loyalties that can be used to pursue both negative and positive forms of political action. To carry out further secularization in such a context requires widening such welfarist accessibility and distribution of benefits by generating institutions that are not religiously circumscribed. Same point about religious patrimonialism. This can be done by both creating non-religiously controlled welfare structures and by promoting the secularizing of control and functioning of such religiously controlled structures. The best example in India would of course be convent schools, convent hospitals, charities of various kinds. In fact, the Sangh's attack on Muslims is because basically they're the Muslim other. The attack on Christians is much more related to the fact that 30% of all charitable institutions in this country related to education, health, etc. and so on are in fact Christian controlled, but they are substantially secularized in a way that your madrasas and your RSS type structures and all are not. Controlled at the top perhaps, but open in terms of employment, accessibility, etc. So it's a process of secularizing even within that. It should be obvious, and you'll be happy to know that I'll be finishing very soon. It should be obvious that to fight against communalism, we need to fight against much, much more than communalism, since its sources are multiple and connect beyond matters of secular and religious to wider and deeper issues of socio-economic, political, cultural, social inadequacies and injustices. The very terms of this debate are extraordinarily narrow. To really address the question of communal conflict, etc., you have to go much wider than the debate about the secular and the religious. Similarly, to fight for secularism, secularization requires us to fight for much, much more than that. It requires us to fight for ever greater democratization, popular empowerment, and justice in all its domains and forms. There is then a dual strategy to be followed. Incidentally, the dialectic between the secular state and secular society is not even straightforward. The pursuit of the former, the secular state, can actually promote the desecularization of the latter, because the most important thing is that whether you are moving in the direction of a more democratic state, a secular state is a necessary but not sufficient condition for a democratic state. In fact, what we had is the examples of this witness the Shah's Iran, Najibullah's Afghanistan, Ataturk's Turkey, and so on. And of course, insofar as an insensitive authoritarian state, it does real damage and injustice, even if it's secular. Secularism as a principle and value resides within the larger and more important category of democracy. Secularization as a process is at its strongest and most desirable when it is connected to the more important and wider process of democratization. The secularity of the Indian state needs to be promoted and defended. Preserving a democratic state requires impartiality towards different religious communities, which is best secured by a principled distance between religion and state apparatuses. The notion that equal respect for all religions is a phenomenon more deeply rooted in Indian society is mistaken. It is itself an elite notion. What is the social reality? Forget the past. What's the social reality today of the Indian people? The social reality today is popular indifference, limitations of caste belongings in relation to other religious groupings or other groupings, popular indifference, limitations of caste belongings, functionist accommodation, I need this Muslim carpenter or whatever, passive coexistence, and an attitude of live and let live. Certainly not any active sense of equal respect for all religions. But there is a wide realization that a democratic state must not be religiously biased. When it comes to the issue of secularizing civil society, elite and intellectual discourse and combat is one thing. This is what this is. Elite and intellectual combat, right? Okay? That's fine. All right. While serious mass-based political activity of propaganda, agitation and promotion or opposition to state policies is an altogether different thing. To explicitly or aggressively advocate secularization is unnecessary and also opens oneself to the charge by opponents of being anti-religious. This is not fair, of course, but it can still be effective. much more appropriate, more in logic with the kind of arguments that I'm putting here, and more sensible strategically, is to aggressively and promote, not secularization, but to aggressively promote and advocate ever greater democratization, empowerment, and economic, political, social, cultural justice. Do this, and secularization will take care of itself. Thank you.